kind of a loss, right? When I see some indies permission campaigns is that it doesn't have a theme to it, right? It's just like, here's this content. This is the name of the album. And it's like, yeah, make it more of a sphere, of a world to enter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important. It allows you to pull into like the qualities of who you are as an artist outside of just being a musician.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. I am your co-host, Corrin Campbell. With me, as always, is the fantabulous Jack McCarthy. How's it going, Jack?
Fantabulous. That is so much pressure.
Yeah. Well,
it's going great. Yeah.
What adjectives would you prefer?
Oh, I don't know. Just, the mildly okay Jack McCarthy is fine. We can go with self-deprecating. It's all good.
No, I'm not going to do that. Well, in any case, Jack is here to talk a lot about permission. I mean, we both are, but Jack is, as we've already discussed, he's in the process of developing a permission-focused training for Indie Pro. And we thought it would be really great. I think, permission is a phase that so many indies struggles with. And I think it's, it makes sense, right? Like, how do you get people from, just kind of knowing who you are to being like, yeah, send me some stuff. I want to be involved. I want to know more. It can be really complicated. And if all you're offering them is we've talked about it several times. If all you're offering is a free download, or like, sometimes some behind the scenes stuff can work, but only if it's really great. So it can be challenging to figure out, how do I get out this message? How do I make it consistent? How do I make sure that these people recognize me when they see me the second time around, right? If you fed them a video view campaign. And so we'll be talking a lot about that today. We've talked before about branding and consistent messaging, but in this episode, we're really going to dive in because I think that's maybe a big disconnect that we see in permission campaigns that indies are currently running. So, Jack, I'm sure that you've also seen kind of a disconnect when indie clients come to you, right? What kind of things have you seen that kind of breaks down a permission offer, in your opinion? Yeah,
totally. I've 100% have seen disconnects all over the place when it comes to permission offers and just overall marketing, but a lot of the disconnects when it comes to branding. And it's interesting. Like, I think artists are in my opinion, very brand minded, just in the way they look at things. They have like many artists and bands have a vision of what they should look like and what's cool to them and why it makes sense and how it all ties together. But then for some really strange reason, when it comes to putting marketing assets together, all of that, like, really cool creativity and all of that, like, awesome, dream kind of stuff that we build up in our heads, it kind of goes out the window. And I haven't totally...
Are you trying to trigger me right now? We talked about this like 3 or 4 episodes ago, and I just was like, use your creativity. Like, I just was freaking out, and I still do, right? Because it's like musicians get into this marketing mindset and they turn off all of the cool things that make them who they are.
Totally.
I feel like Jack's trying to trigger me right now. But I'm not going to do that.
Just a little.
I am going to stick to the talking points of the episode today. But yeah, I mean, and what are the ways that you see these disconnects happen most aggressively, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. So I think most aggressively, I see those like branding disconnects when it comes to permission. I see that the disconnect happen in kind of in the place where you're looking to bridge, where people have or where fans have interacted with you and in what ways and how that ties into what you're trying to offer them, whether that be in the messaging of the ad, whether that be in, the opt-in mechanism, whether it's a landing page or a messenger flow in Facebook Messenger, or whether it be in the actual content that you're delivering and the way that you're delivering it. That's the biggest place where I find like the overall brand gets disconnected. It's like, how do I repurpose what people have seen from me up until this point and use that in, in taking them in this next step of a journey with me, into this, this next step of relationship. When I'm getting their digits, how do I take where we've been so far and make that a part of it? That's kind of one of the biggest areas of disconnect that I often see with indies.
Yeah, I think that's something where, again, we just get our brains mixed in, especially, that's the terrible thing about a swipe file. Like, it's great, right? But I think for some people, it's so out of how they would speak or so different from the way that they naturally are that they have trouble getting over to, looking at that and then getting it over to where they would say something, right? It's like too many steps away. Yeah. And especially if you're looking at regular marketing, which obviously here at Indepreneur, we believe in that. We believe in looking at standard digital marketing because there's a lot of really bad music marketing. So the best thing to do is to look at marketers who are doing things well and looking at their landing pages and their emails. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but now how do I translate that into something that doesn't feel used car salesman about my music?
Yeah. And I think, 100%. And I think it's not only about translating, what inspires you outside of music into music and into, the artist to fan relationship as, broadly speaking, but also like you specifically, Right. And I think that's one of the other areas where I often see the disconnect is like, you might take an idea that you see as, a bribe that looks really cool to you from, I don't know, your favorite clothing brand or something. And you're like, oh, I can repurpose this into something that works for my fans and me. And then you vaguely transition it over into, oh, this is how I would talk about, this offer, but in a music context and to people who care about music. But they don't get 100% of the way there and put it in their voice to their fans. It's just like this vague kind of like, I'm an artist or I'm in a band and we do this. And, it doesn't really land, as if you're talking to your fans. It's like any artist could be saying it. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so we don't have the 100% connection in a lot of these situations. So in this episode, I want you to tell me how to make it 100% connected. Like, where do we start? Where does it begin?
That's such a good question. And I think it varies and I hate saying that it varies, but I think it does honestly vary for every artist who's looking into getting in the weeds with the permission stage of the buddy system. And why I say that is because you really have to look back at what you've done up till now. If you're an artist who is just starting out and you have like a limited number of marketing assets up until this point, maybe you just have, a fan finder campaign, some recurring content that you've been putting out, whether that be singles or just, kind of general posts, or whether you've got a live stream sort of thing in place. Or you might be, an artist that's been doing work for years and years and years and just kind of connecting all these dots of digital marketing for the first time. You might have a backlog of tons of stuff to look back at. So where I'm going with this is like, depending on where you're at and what you've done up until this point is kind of what you need to be looking at. So for the, the more grassroots stage artist, you'll want to look back at, what do your marketing assets look like right now? What does your fan finder campaign look like? What's the song for? What is the song, the song that you're using in that? Is it an acoustic tune? Is it something full band? Are you, doing kind of like the talented friend kind of video where, you're playing a whack instrument in a really crazy location? Kind of jotting down notes about all of those elements and saying like, okay, well, what makes this campaign asset, this introduction stage asset, unique about me, and why is it eye-catching to people? Why is it working the way that it is? And identify some of those things. Is it the song? Is it specific lyrics from the song? Is it the headline copy that you're using? Do you have a really unique pattern interrupt at the beginning? Is it the location? So sort of jotting down, just for example, elements of that marketing asset and kind of itemizing them out and doing that for each and every part of your marketing work that you've done so far, leading you to permission. I think that will help you to identify like, okay, what have I done that's cool? And what have I done that I think is eye-catching? And what does the data tell me is eye-catching? Have fans been interacting with you? Have the DMs been lighting up with, you know, like people saying like, oh, like the bridge of your song was super dope, or like, holy crap, how did you film that on a rooftop, or something like that? You know, look into those sort of more intangible data points and say, okay, like I've got some ideas on things that have been resonating with people. Now, how can I bring them into, you know, this next stage? So that might look like, you know, shooting your opt-in ad video in the same location that you shot your fan finder, just kind of as kind of a jumping off point. So that's kind of like stage one, I think, is looking back at your marketing assets at the earlier stages of the buddy system. Starting there and kind of considering what your brand and overall imagery looks like in those.
Right. And so, I mean, obviously there's a certain environmental thing that you're talking about there, right? Like having these ads shot, you know, doing a music performance and then having a similar environment when you are recording ads that are going to follow up with people who saw that video, right?
Yep.
Having your face present is obviously super important. Or, you know, if you're a digital, like electronic artist or, you know, for whatever reason, you've got a Daft Punk thing going on, right? Like Daft Punk never shows their face. They always wear masks. But the masks are consistently present, right? So if you're using a visualizer, which, you know, we don't recommend visualizers, but I know that indies use them. And some have done it with success if their music is kind of interrupting enough, right? And if they're creative with the visualizer. So having a similar treatment in the follow-up ad for that, you know? So whatever it is that they're seeing, whether it's your face, your outfit, the style, the environment, the color scheme, you know, all of these things can help people make the connection and really feel like they're kind of getting into your world, right? Which then also means that where they go after that ad, not the video view ad, but the next one, you know, where they go to give you their information is also really important, right?
Totally. Yep.
So, I mean, that's something where you have to, again, bring in these certain qualities. So there's a visual kind of quality to things. Obviously, that's not it, though, right? So another thing I think that's relevant here is language, right? Which we also referenced at the beginning of the episode, talking to your fans in a way that is it's just imbuing who you are, you know, consistently throughout the pattern. So, Jack, for people who are like struggling to figure out how to talk to people, which is kind of funny, do you have any kind of like inspo that you go to, or are there exercises that artists can do? Like, what do you think is a way that artists can really hone in on their voice in how they talk to people?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at that and sort of spin it. One is like, I would 100% recommend that you look back to the way that you communicate with your fans when you're not thinking about communicating with your fans. Look back to your DMs, look back to your comments, and sort of just the, you know, the one-to-one interactions that you're having with people on social, for example. Look back to that for like an inspo of how laid back you sound, because essentially that's somewhat of the casual sort of conversational tone that you may want to imbue into your ad copy, for example, or your landing page copy. That's a starting point to see like, okay, are there common themes or words that I'm using here? Is there a way that I'm describing my music, or is there a way that others are describing my music that I could then, you know, kind of pick up on buzzwords or little catchphrases that come up often? That sort of thing, I think from a copywriting perspective, is really helpful. So that's kind of like starting point number one. And then starting point number two, and maybe this is going to come off like vague advice, and I hope that it doesn't, but I think the important thing when it comes to talking to your fans and communicating an offer is learning and really drafting out how to be specific about what you're saying. Because more often than not, I find with permission stage offers, bribes, is the messaging gets blurred when you don't really have a clear idea of what it is that you're offering and what a fan is going to get when they sign up. So often, like, I find that artists are sort of just throwing throwing crap at a wall and sort of throwing the kitchen sink at everything and not really having an idea of what that is. They might say things like studio videos or behind the scenes footage, but like, what does that really mean?
What does that mean? Exclusive content. Isn't that our favorite now?
Exclusive content. Yeah. I think getting really in the weeds about what those things are, thinking, okay, well, what is a behind the scenes video in the studio mean to you? What does that mean? What is exclusive content specifically? Being really explicit about what that is,
Right.
Maybe you're calling it like, this is a studio video diary where I'm going to walk you through the process of me recording a song. That's way more explicit and obvious than just like behind the scenes studio videos. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because I think we feel a lot of pressure to have like dedicated, almost like talking points, right? And sometimes I've even seen it on certain opt-in pages, like we're bulletizing, right? All of the benefits. So we feel the need to like say things really succinctly and shortly, which results in that behind the scenes videos, right? Or exclusive content. But in reality, since people don't really understand what that is, even if they do understand it in a broad concept, I do think that, YouTube and influencers and like all of these people who have started to create personalities online to generate social engagement, I think they do use those terms really loosely and, talk about content as if that's just a normal thing that everyone discusses now, But I think that can be very generationally specific and very audience specific. And if you are marketing music, you may not be marketing to people who follow YouTubers, who follow influencers, right? There's that's not necessarily why they're interested in you because you're another person to influence them. So
totally.
Kind of taking it out of that, right? And that's another thing where when you're in marketing jargon and even when you're in independent marketing jargon, right? Independent music marketing, we use those terms all the time. But it's definitely not meant to now be repurposed as a forward-facing communication.
Right.
So, that's something like when I got out of the military, I had to stop using acronyms. And there were certain phrases that I realized didn't communicate anything to anyone outside the military. And there was a disconnect in me making my point to someone with something that I thought was really succinct, because it was this military phrase that I was very, familiar with and meant something to other soldiers immediately. But then when I came over to the civilian side, it was like, oh, yeah, no, they have no clue what you're talking about. So that could be a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's an interesting way to think about it. It's almost like an inside joke, but at the permission stage, like you might not be at inside joke level with your fans yet, where like the thing that you might be trying to express to them and hoping that they understand, that is not going to be totally clear. Again, like I've probably mentioned this before in previous episodes, but like at the permission stage where you're making a bribe to somebody, a lot of times this is the first ask that you're putting in front of them, the first offer of any kind. It's a freebie, sure, but it's the first thing. So like all of that kind of insider language that you might have with fans who are really, really deep into your world, you likely won't have that with these people who are kind of just coming onto your list for the first time.
Oh, so, dude, totally.
Leans on the necessity to be explicit. And I think something that might help, here's a heuristic to kind of like diagnose what, how to work that out. Like, let's say exclusive content is, we talk about that as like, a benefit, but like, is it really a benefit? I would say like at the permission stage, especially if you're just saying exclusive content, that sounds more like a feature to me. So what you should do is, list out, you could say like exclusive content so that, and then describe what that exclusive content is and what the benefit of it is. So it gives, a little bit more behind, a little bit more meat behind it.
Right. Something you said just like triggered me, and
oh no.
No, in a good way, but there's something that I've always loved about when fans are going to my shows. At some point, fans started making 2 C's, which if you're on YouTube, you'll see what it is. They do this, and it's just a heart. It's a formation instead of the heart that you always see people putting up at shows. Somebody started doing this CC thing and it just caught on. And so I would see this at live shows. So then I was like, well, I would love for more of the fans to realize that this is a thing. I mean, I posted it on socials but it was really fun, and it was something that was more, you know, so the audience could feel like even more together. It was something special for shows, for, you know, a Corinne Campbell show, right? So I had a graphic made of it. And again, if you're on YouTube, I'll show it. But otherwise, it's a logo that just has, of course, like there we go, there's focus. It has the 2 C's, and it has my logo kind of behind them, because my logo is also kind of formed of 2 C's. And and then it says Corinne Campbell Core, because that's what I call my fans. And I printed that on shirts and on stickers and buttons, and like had all kinds of merch with it on it. And I realized that like new fans, or even fans that just hadn't seen me live and just hadn't happened to see that social stuff that I posted about it, they had no clue what that was. It didn't mean anything to them. And the shirt didn't sell well. You know, people were not interested. And it's kind of funny, it even up to like 2 weeks ago, right? Like I have, you know, this greatest hits thing happening. And so of course I have all this merch that has the CC logo on it. And then I've got all this merch with the hands on it. And Jesse Gillenwalters, Basic Printer, was here in the office with me. And I was, you know, talking to him about this stuff. And I was like, I feel like I want to put this on a shirt or this on these things. And he was like, I don't really get that. And I was like, what are you talking? He was like, I don't really get that design. He's like, I mean, it's fine, but I don't get it. Right. And it's funny because my partner TJ has always said that as well. Like, I don't get it. So I realized that this was something that I was trying to communicate, something that a lot of people didn't understand unless they were deeper in, right? And they had been to a show and done it, or had followed my socials religiously and saw like the 3 or 4 times I posted it, right? And so it's interesting how these things that we know, because we are in a world with our fans, we can kind of lose perspective on like how people got to that far into your world and what it took for them to get there. Sometimes we just think, oh, well, this is what my truest fans really love, so I'm just going to do it for everybody. And it's like, but they might not get it if you skip that far. So it's like your merch and your brand has its own little buddy system as well. You know, like how far into it can you really get before you're just confusing people? So I think that's something that I have seen with indies and their permission campaigns, and hell, even in myself, right? Like I just illustrated. We try to progress people faster than they're ready. So when you are using permission campaigns, I think it's important to zoom out a little bit, get a little more bird's eye view on it, and don't require people to understand or be really like into the lingo of you and your fans before they've really become one, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that can be really important. It's like, you know, you can get to a place where you're focusing too much on the branding and excluding people by doing so. So there is I feel like there is a happy medium. And actually this is a perfect transition to mention a band that did permission campaigns really, really well. And they had run an album launch style permission campaign using the ultimate album launch kind of strategy, and that's the 502s. I know Ed's been on the podcast, and maybe even some of the other guys have been on the podcast as well back in the day. But Ed and the 502s had an amazing album launch for their record back a couple years ago now. I guess it was 2017 or 2018.
Yeah,
and
it was like Indepreneur beginnings, man.
Yeah, super crazy. It feels like a second ago, honestly. But their content and the overall like branding and like qualities behind this permission campaign were so solid. I often refer back to like the messaging behind their whole campaign, not just the opt-in ad, not just the landing page, not just the content pages. The whole thing from a 360 picture was super thematic and like tied in everything from the very beginning of when, you know, fans were just being introduced to them, just discovering them. They brought them on this whole journey, and it was branded around this idea of, you know, it being a party. And it wasn't exclusionary in any way. Like their branding was just there enough. They tied in, you know, previous elements of the earlier stages of the buddy system, like I said, and the whole thing was just like beautifully branded.
Yeah.
And I often to this day look back to it as like a pretty solid starting point for an artist to say like, okay, like this is the kind of like theme and branding and quality that you want to have at the permission stage to bring people through a narrative.
Right. And if you guys want to go check out, we actually had a 3-episode arc with them. It was in October, November of 2017, but it's episodes 30 through 32. And we had Ed and 2 of his band members with him on that podcast. And they discussed, you know, how that went for them and then how they planned for the future from it.
Yeah.
But it does go.
Those were great episodes.
Yeah. It does go into detail about, you know, how much they spent and what they got out of it and the actions that they had to take to make it all worth it. And, you know, what kind of opportunities it opened up for them. So yeah, that's episode 30 through 32, if you want to go check it out. But, you know, that's something that, you know, and they're actually preparing another album launch, aren't they, for their upcoming record?
Yeah, they are. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, and it's so much easier to do
sharing
it
with us.
Oh, yeah. It's so much easier to do the second time around. Hopefully we can have Ed on after they do this next one, because I'd love to hear his perspective on the differences. And like, because obviously there's going to be, you know, there's still probably going to be developing people from cold traffic to get into this album launch funnel, right? Because that's what they did the first time. But they're also going to have, I'm sure, their warm audience involved in it as well. So kind of pacing the two, right? Making sure that it's accessible to anyone, but also making their, you know, return fans feel like they're a little bit in the know. You know what I mean? I think that's going to be a fun line to walk. I mean, obviously, Ed, if you guys didn't know, Ed is working at the IndieX level as a technician. He's, you know, full-time and managing tons of accounts that are looking for inspo in that department. So he's definitely been able to practice those chops outside of just his own releases since then. So I'm interested to see what will develop and what will stay the same. But something that they did excellently from the get-go was, you know, their faces were very present. Their video was very creative. They had very consistent branding. And not only did they have consistent branding as the 502s, but as Jack was saying, their merchandise, the theme of their album launch, the way that they talked about it was all very specific to that launch. And which was specific to the album, you know, and they made something fun out of it and thematic. And so I think that's something else that I see kind of a loss, right? When I see some indies permission campaigns is that it doesn't have a theme to it, right? It's just like, here's this content. This is the name of the album. And it's like, yeah, make it more of a sphere, of a world to enter, you know? And I think the 502s did that excellently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important. It allows you to pull into like the qualities of who you are as an artist outside of just being a musician or outside of just being a songwriter or whatever. Right. It allows you to pull in, you know, things about you that make you you and why they matter to your fans and how there's overlap there. You know, do you have interests that are similar to those of your fans? And that's something that, you know, we flesh out more in the upcoming permission training, which is pretty cool. But we talk about this idea of like a topic wheel and the different interests that you have as a human being and how you can tie those in, how you can tie those into your permission stage offers. Another band that I'm thinking of, an IndieX client that was on board last summer, they did an album launch style bribe as well. And it was a really cool offer that was, you know, it was themed around, the band is really into like the outdoors and rock climbing and stuff. So the whole launch was themed around this idea of like the climb, rock climbing, and
cool.
and specific. Yeah, so it was really, really cool, and they tied that kind of messaging in to this whole experience. So that's something that, you know, we're talking about it in relation to album launches, but it can really be tied into any kind of bribe. It doesn't necessarily just have to be album launch offers.
Totally. Yeah. There was one founder in the Indie Founder Permission, the last session that just wrapped, and their brand was very much about like vision quest. It was very psychedelic. A lot of their artwork was like out in a desert, and then they'd like just be sitting in a boat, you know, or it was just, there was a lot of kind of a journey element to their branding anyway, but it really lent itself to a great bribe because it was talking about a vision quest and like, join us on this quest. You know what I mean? Like, how freaking great does that sound? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it sounds,
super cool.
Yeah, it definitely sounds intentional, right? And, you know, who knows if that is, you know, going to be the way that their brand stays forever. But they were definitely, you know, Cooper, who was in the band and also in the session, was just really good at honing in on, you know, what are the things that are going on in our brand right now that make sense as far as like progression, right? Or a journey of life in some way. Another, and I'm like giving away everybody's founder work, but another longtime indie named Greg Owens, he's run a lot of campaigns over his career, and something that we were focusing on, he basically has he developed basically an idea for love and other drugs, and the other drugs is like whiskey, and he's actually, you know, a big whiskey enthusiast. He has different recipes and stuff like that, right? So that became something that was very lifestyle driven, where he's like, let's talk about whiskey, everybody. And his music, you know, and his typical customer avatar is very compatible with that. But I think that really, you know, helps you again. And I've talked about this, I feel like every episode. I know it hasn't been, but that really allows you to take things that are a true part of you and make this stuff fun. Because it's something that you're interested in anyway, and it doesn't have to be so self-focused. Here's what I did. I went over here and I recorded this part, and then I did this. Like, you can also make it interactive. And that's where I think things really win, is when you can figure out, this isn't just me presenting you with information. This is us like going on a fun thing together, you know, or maybe not a fun thing. Maybe that's not your brand. On a sad thing together, on a heartbreak thing, on a, you know, quest for betterness. Like it totally depends on your brand, but all of the above is possible.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, like you can look into yourself a little bit here and do, you know, for lack of a better word, some soul searching on like, what are the things that make you tick as a person? You know, for a religious kind of artist, you might have a spirituality bent to your bribes. If you're in a punk band, you might have like a political or historical bent to your bribes. All of that kind of stuff, you know, whatever makes, you can even look deeper into like what you're writing your songs about and like where the source of that is coming from, and be like, okay, like, how does this relate to things outside of music, and how can I tie that in?
Yeah.
And that's what makes it fun and makes it real. I have my phone in front of me right now, and I'm looking at I just thought of this, and I can't believe that I didn't think of it before we started recording this episode. About a week ago, I screenshotted from my swipe file an ad or a post that I saw from 21 Pilots, who has very specific, cool branding, and their fans are definitely in on it. And they're running a really interesting bribe right now. So I wanted to share it while it's on the top of my mind.
For sure.
And it looks like the bribe is for, it says, "We didn't think you would tear through the code so easily." This is the ad copy. "It should have taken a week, but you did it just over 12 hours. You got us this time. Now join in with your footage, your art, your dances, and be part of the first ever never-ending music video." So what it sounds like, and I did a little bit more looking, it looks like the band had done like a scavenger hunt of sorts where fans could find some kind of code, and apparently their fan base got through it really quick. Wow. And so they're running this opt-in. Now they're pointing people to a landing page, and it says, "Become a part of the never-ending level of concern," which I believe is one of their new singles. And And this bribe is positioned as welcome to the first ever never ending music video. 3 minutes and 40 seconds on all new never ending level of concern will play with videos you submit.
Wow.
Dance, animate, dressed up, get creative. So it's a user generated content, kind of 15 minutes of fame style bribe.
Right.
But it's so heavily branded in like that small town or that 21 Pilots kind of mysterious,
Right.
cheeky. I'm trying to think of all the 21 Pilots adjectives, sort of
Not
dark, dark, spooky, fantabulous vibe.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's cool. And, it's kind of inspiring to see a larger artist doing this, right? Because we don't get to see that often. I think it's also interesting that like you saw that ad, even though you didn't even know what it was for or what it was about, but it made you go look it up. Right. And I think that that's actually cool as well. Where you're like, wait a second, I didn't dig through any code. Who dug through code? What's this? There was enough interesting in the ad for you to like want to go look at it. And yes, you do marketing and you're interested in music marketing, But I think even if I had seen that as, a casual fan, I would have been interested to see like, what are they talking about? What is this? And that would give them an opportunity to get me as a bigger fan. I know like 4 of their songs and like, I'm not a huge 21 Pilots fan. I like what I've heard, but I definitely don't follow their brand. I don't know much about them at all. Except that Josh uses Good Die Young, same brand as me, to dye his hair. That's what I know. So, other than that though, I don't know much. And that would be an opportunity for me to be like, well, this is weird and interesting. I'm gonna look, and then get pulled deeper into their web. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's actually really clever, let alone everything on the other side of it, right? The fact that people can have their 15 minutes of fame and get into this whole thing by, for completely cool user generated content reasons, right? So that in and of itself is a whole other section of what makes this work. But I think just in the ad alone, I think that would have been something where I felt like a moment of FOMO where I was like, what happened?
Yeah.
I want to be 100%. In it, and if you can entice that in a permission bribe for your fans, like that, they're self-motivated at that point and you don't have to sell them anything. So that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's super cool. Like, and like I said, it really like embodied their voice and their brand and their messaging. And I think, going back to what we were saying, like as an artist, you might have struggles coming up with what that looks like. And I know this is something that we've touched on in a previous episode when we were talking about dollar a day advertising and green light warmth boosting. But I wanted to ask you, Corrin, related to permission, what are some steps that you would look at, especially going into kind of the super secret ninja stuff that you do on the back end when it comes to analytics, about uncovering, some of those more intangible branding qualities that an artist might want to pull into their bribes. What would you recommend? Yeah,
well, I mean, again, like you said, that's something that we did talk about a bit with green light warmth boosting, but going into audience insights on Facebook and looking at people connected to your page, but also people connected maybe to artists or interests that is popular, or even if it's an interest that you want to start presenting in a bribe, right? Say you're like Greg and you're like, I like whiskey and I totally want to do like a mixology bribe, here's a song, here's a drink for the song, make this cocktail and then have a video of you making that cocktail or whatever, Yeah. So you can really say that you didn't necessarily think of, mixology as an interest for you. You can go into audience insights and see what people who are interested in that, what else they're interested in, and see if it ties into the conversation organically into something that is interesting for you. I think also this is where it's funny because we get a lot of criticism as musicians in our DMs, in the comments on our ads, or on our videos. There's always people who are kind of, just negative Nancy's. And I'm always like, don't listen to those guys. Like, unless 10 people tell you the same thing, like that guy just wants to rain on your parade and don't worry about it. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, if one person really identifies with an interest that you have, it's worth using something like greenlight warmth boosting to create some posts around it. And if it's something that's a natural interest to you, and see how just your organic audience responds to it. They might give you some ideas based on the feedback on those posts to then generate something of even more interest in that topic. It also gives you an opportunity to test how people react to it. If your existing fan base is not interested in, say you do the mixology thing, and so you go live with a video where you're like, talking about your 3 favorite cocktails on Facebook or something like that. And nobody is into it. The comments they leave are non-existent or they're not passionate about it. You're like, okay, well, I tried that. That's, people aren't really responding to that. But say everyone is freaking out and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And like, you're like, what would you guys think if I made, a custom drink for every song on this next record or something like that? So you can really use your existing audience to bounce ideas off of. They would love to tell you how to run your life. You could tell that by looking at your messages. So give them the opportunity to do that, and that's why I like greenlight warmth boosting, is for that reason. I can kind of build out a topic wheel and throw some things at my existing audience who I trust. Like they're there because they want to be there. They've been around a while, they know my brand, but they're also just regular people and they're more objective than I am about myself. So using something like that, and then just gathering, even if 1 or 2 people have something cool to say about it, they might inspire you, So if you want to test out some things before you build out this whole experience to see if people respond to it, try it on the people who already love you. See how they respond to it, right? Then when you start feeding in more stuff, and you start looking at audiences for your fan finder and then looking at how to build out this permission campaign, it can really educate you on the best way to make that an easy 1-2 step process.
Totally. Yeah, that's so good. And I hope that gives you guys like a little bit of a framework for thinking about or realizing how the earlier stages of the buddy system do play such a big role in this. So if you haven't experimented with, like Corrin was saying, if you haven't experimented with, outside elements, topic wheels in those earlier stages, you should look to start doing so, whether it be for a current bribe that you're working on or a future one. Starting to work that in can be really, really helpful if you start doing it at the earlier stages. So I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, most definitely. And, you're going to change over time as well. Your interests are going to change. Your fans are going to get older, and I think over time, if you have these pieces, these little batches of content that you've put, that you've put out, like think of what could be something substantial for your artistry 2 years from now. Right? You're different and things have changed, but this could still be something of interest, right? It's not too timely. It's not, something that wouldn't be relevant anymore. It's actually like a huge topic that you can, kind of develop a whole thing around even later. So I think that's something to kind of focus on when you're developing these bribes.
Yeah, totally. That's such a good point. And actually, one last little tidbit that I want to mention that you totally triggered in me was you mentioned getting nasty DMs or comments or whatever from people trying to run your life.
Right.
I actually audited an amazing opt-in page, probably a couple months ago from one of the indies, on Indies Live. For those of you who don't know, we do Indies Live sessions with the indies who are inside of Indepreneur. And every week we'll do an Indies Live Q&A call where we'll either audit their assets that we're looking at. We'll go over questions that they might have, and we do monthly ground reports as well. But on this particular audit session, I looked at an amazing opt-in page for a bribe, and in the testimonial section, which is something that we often recommend having on an opt-in page, is just like, do you have quotes from fans or things that people have said or comments that you can highlight where people are giving you up, big ups. This person did the exact opposite and pulled all of the negative, spammy, just garbage trash comments that he had gotten. Just And it was like, why you should like this. And he listed out some benefits. And then he said, or maybe why you won't. And it was just like highlighting like just hilarious things. And it was like, wow, this guy's funny. Like he took the stuff that people didn't like about him and put it on display for his actual fans to like laugh at and joke with him about. So there was like a humorous element to it. And I thought that it was just so amazing.
I've seen something like that too. There was a female artist, and I can't remember her name, but she actually wrote a song that was like the lyrics were her hate comments. Have you seen that too? It was.
I have. Yeah.
It made its way around the internet for sure. It wasn't somebody. I mean, maybe she is an indie. Hopefully she is, but if she's not, it was definitely like millions and millions of views, right? Like lots of people were watching this. So, and I like just I don't have a good enough sense of humor about myself to do something like that. But if you do, like that, I think that that's actually a really creative way to use that to your advantage, right?
Yeah.
It's the best way to get back at trolls is to repurpose their content and, you know, basically have it work to your benefit, which is the opposite of what they want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I definitely think that that was a creative idea.
Yeah, it was hilarious. I thought it was really, really good. So talk about branding. If you've got humor in your brand, that's an interesting way to leverage it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for today's episode. I'm super excited for us to continue along this permission path. I think that there's a lot of indies who hit us up with questions on a daily basis in the Indie Pro group, in the Indepreneur Indies group, that are, you know, just really looking at how to make these things creative and true to their brand. So we're going to keep trucking along with it for the next couple of episodes. So if you are, you know, in the process of developing a permission campaign, or even if you want to brainstorm one to kind of work ahead so that you don't have to feel the pressure of doing it later, hang with us for these next couple of episodes, and we will see you next week on Creative Juice. Thanks, Indies.